So last night, I was at a classmate's house working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to the house, you must drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 to 6 miles. We start working on the project about 6 p.m., and I ended up hanging around for a while after, so I left his house pretty late, at about 11 p.m., and started down the road back towards town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no streetlights, and the road was unkept and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I just used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figured I was about 3 miles from my house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path. I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backwards, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw that there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel, as if he had just been knocked down after a bad incident. I immediately sensed something was wrong. The way his car had just coincidentally come to a rest in a position that totally blocked the road was a big red flag for me. I had just heard stories of people playing dead in the road as to lure unsuspecting people out of their cars so they could rob them. I decided, forget this, and elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw the car into reverse and kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rear view and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now walking towards my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I put it into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side door, tugging at the handle which, thank the Lord, was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathered. Definitely a meth head, or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tell me. And when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate and we called the cops. But I was grateful that my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report, and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. But holy shit, I still get so shook up over it. I keep getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. Please be careful out there, and always keep your guard up.
I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque, always up for exploring. We took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM 55. It's a remote, teeny tiny 2-lane highway. We loved those types of roads up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles, and there's virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns. And towns could be miles apart. So we were on NM 55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck up ahead of us, going to the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about a half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed the direction we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us. And he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back into the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would get within a few car lengths and then drop back a little, and then speed back up and get within a few car lengths again. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road, and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones and neither one had signal, typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back to the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour, if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical for us on these 55 miles per hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed, the old truck did a U-turn and sped up to get behind the first truck. As we watched all this, we could see the first white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed, and for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought old beat-up pickup guy had set us a trap in the road and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving into the fields. We were in an SUV, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So we stayed on the highway. By now, white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into his walkie-talkie as he stayed right on our bumper. And old beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles per hour and edging up to 90. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed toward a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw the plate said U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There was something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police, and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him. and whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into meth lab territory. But since this happened on an actual highway rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on out there, it's not good.
I have always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night, and the safety offered by the house and light. I never had anything to base this fear on until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night, the game went on into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction, and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green, right when you finally decide to just run it. Of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there, and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night. But earlier that week, I had just heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking." And for whatever reason, that was a night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact, and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out my window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and all my windows were up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator, just in case, and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it was just going to be an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me, so I could just get out of there. I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put her bag down, and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her, and she motioned to me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button, and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she did not seem to notice or care. And she leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny, and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20-plus years on the street, or was 60-something years old and had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there is no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery that made my skin crawl. It was robotic and seemed practiced, and like she was disconnected from the moment. After a brief debate in my head on whether or not I should give her a ride, I told her that I had to get home and I couldn't give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in close and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride. I told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. "My boyfriend beat me." At this point, the light changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light and then looked down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the right decision." Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if there were people waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since, and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark.
One night, sometime last summer, after a party at Willowbrook Hall in Justice, Illinois, I saw her. I saw Resurrection Mary. Resurrection Mary is a very famous ghost in the Chicago area. As the story goes, one night in the 1930s, a girl named Mary was going to a party in that same building. At the time, it was called O'Brien Hall or something like that. As she was crossing the street, she was run over and killed. She was buried in nearby Resurrection Cemetery. On any given night, but especially on nights when a gathering is taking place in Willowbrook Hall, she'll appear on the side of the road as a hitchhiker. She appears very realistic and not a see-through or glowing spirit like you'd see in the movies. Then, if someone picks her up, she'll get in the car and tell the driver to take her home. She'll give directions and will be talking to you as though she's alive. However, Resurrection Cemetery is on the way to her home, and as soon as the driver passes it, Mary disappears. I had heard the stories about Mary, but I was never a believer in ghosts or the paranormal, and especially not a believer of this local urban legend. It just so happened that I was returning from a party that night, alone. I drove down Archer Road, the road on which Mary is seen, and on which both the hall and the cemetery are located. As I drove, I came across a girl hitchhiking. It was getting a little chilly outside, so I offered to give the girl a ride. She didn't say much, just got in. She was dressed in a 1930s ballroom gown. She looked like a real person. Her skin was a healthy pink, and she didn't look ghost-like at all. She said she was going home and gave me directions, which I can't remember, except that she told me I had to stay on Archer Road for a long time. I did. As we approached the cemetery, she told me to look to my left, as if she spotted something unusual. I looked out my window, but saw nothing weird. I turned back to ask her what she saw, but then I looked to the passenger seat and there was nobody there. I checked the back seat, but it was empty too. She had completely vanished into thin air. Scared out of my mind, I floored it the rest of the way home, and am now a believer.